Hey Psych 201 students, welcome to the end of week 2 of general psychology. Hope things are going well for you. This week's forum was quite interesting on this topic of psychopathology and the brain and what its implications are, if any, for legal matters and issues. So, liked reading the posts. There's a diversity of responses that people put out there. And it's a topic, again, as I mentioned in some earlier comments, that I've been thinking a lot about lately, so I wanted to get your thoughts on it and get some discussion going. And I think we succeeded. There were some very thoughtful, very lengthy posts on this one, and I could definitely tell that that the topic, not me personally, but the topic, maybe got some people a little bit riled up in a good way. I felt like the people composed themselves overall very well on the forum. Um, so what do I want to say? Well, I posed the situation in kind of black and white terms. I asked you, the should a brain abnormality um, come to bear in a case on somebody who committed a violent crime and who has been diagnosed with something like psychopathy or antisocial personality disorder, two related disorders. So I presented it as a black and white issue, and the thing is, it's not really that way. But we hope that it can be treated as such. Maybe in legal proceedings, we would look for an answer. Either it's relevant or it's not. There isn't a shade of gray, but that's not reality there. And I think more and more you are finding that biological research, the brain anatomy, functional activity of the brain, neuroscience is making its way into legal matters and legal proceedings. And so Adrian Rain's work is very relevant here. So in his work, he has shown that people who have prenatal exposure to alcohol, to cigarette smoke, and to different types of chemical or emotional and physical abuse are at greater risk for developing things like psychopathy. He has case studies that show that people who have very temporary mental conditions, they're rarer than the normal long-term psychiatric disorders, but for example, brain tumors that could impinge on areas of the brain that involve inhibition or moral reasoning. If those are affected, negatively affected or impaired, then people can do things that they would not normally do. That has happened before. And he makes this argument that we should consider those things and we should not lay complete blame or blame at all in some cases. Of course, that's easier said than done, and I agree. I see the point made by a lot of commenters, like, well, who cares? Somebody's rights were violated. You need to go through the process of the legal process and potentially the punishment of this person for committing a crime or something like that. So I get that. And so it's not an easy issue to deal with, but I think that also, though, leaving out information that could be relevant to a trial, and I think leaving out behavioral, psychological, and neuroscientific information, just ignoring it, when it could have some bearing on either way, it could have some bearing in a way that would be helpful to the plaintiff, or it could be helpful to the defendant. Either way, ignoring the relevance of that information, I think, is maybe wrong. But the key is that we have access to good information, that we know what we're talking about from a scientific perspective before we make that leap. And that brings me up to one, if I were to contribute to this post myself, which I do through the webcam rather than writing in, I think that what I would point out is that although Adrian Rain has a lot of very compelling work on this topic, there's the issue of the uncontrolled or the third mediating variable. There is a relationship he shows between prenatal alcohol exposure and propensity proneness towards violence in adulthood. However, there are a lot of other variables, and I know that he does try to account for some of those, but they may be missed. They may be in the brain, they may be somewhere else, they may be environmental. And it still is a relationship, not a cause. And until we can establish from a scientific perspective a definitive cause or set or pathway towards a causal relationship between brain abnormality and bad behavior, we're not at a point, I think, where we could safely use that scientific information to really make that decision as to whether to let somebody off the hook or give them some kind of rehabilitation as opposed to just well, rehabilitation as in not in prison, as opposed to the type of rehabilitation, sometimes you can put that in quotes, not to be too cynical, that somebody would get in a normal prison population, serving out their sentence and being punished for what they've done. So in the research methods top section in the course that was last week, you learned a little bit about that, about how we can establish cause and effect through experiments, but those are done in a laboratory, and we sometimes try to impose that methodology into messy and complex systems, and we think we've got the answer. Yes, there's a relationship, prenatal alcohol syndrome, increased likelihood of violence, but again, without controlling for other variables, we don't know the direct causal relationship there, and that's an important one to establish. That's my take on this. So just wanted to share that with you. Let's see. Just taking a peek here at the Moodle site for the course on another screen here. That's why I'm looking away from you at the moment. We're moving into week 3. Our topic's going to be learning in memory, standard quizzes, my Psych Lab assignment, and forum post on that. I'll get the forum topic chosen and posted this weekend. And also your My Psych Lab simulations. I went through and looked at those from the first week, and I'll be looking at week 2s and talking about those next week. Those are sort of very general, what do you know about psychology, taking a psychological survey just to get you oriented in terms of some things about the discipline. I guess some things I got from those from the data, which by the way you can access yourselves if you go into the simulations. If you click next to the simulation, for example, what do you know about psychology, you'll see a link for course. It'll show you graphs and data for you guys, for the 25 or so students that are enrolled in this course. But you can also look at global, and you can see data for that was submitted by users of My Psych Lab across all universities that do use it. So just FYI, if you were wanting to take a look at what that data looks like, feel free to do that. I encourage it to kind of bring you full circle in terms of the effort you put into to filling out those surveys. I got a sense that people were not quite feeling too trustworthy of the media, and especially things like local news and newspapers, and the trust level didn't increase too much when you went up to like national level news and newspapers. So a certain wariness or distrust there, which it's not to say that isn't somewhat deserved, at least some skepticism. In terms of psychology, I think one thing I wanted to comment on was there was a high proportion of people that maybe felt that psychological research had a questionable ethical record. And if you look at in terms of conduct, and certainly there are some high-profile studies, we don't get into those too much in this particular course, but in 202 you talk about like the Stanford prison experiments, Stanley Milgram's obedience experiments. Those are the textbook, literally, examples that really bring or put people's thoughts about the ethics of psychology into the context. They kind of frame their beliefs about psychology and ethics using those examples. Just to let you know, there is a lot of oversight into psychological research. Certainly things slip through. We talked about ethics last week, how fraud can occur in psych and other sciences too. But in both animal and human research, there's a real strong emphasis on maintaining very high ethical standards and minimizing risk on research participants. So just wanted to clear that up a little bit. Not everybody felt distrustful of psychology, but maybe those questions about the media just got you in this frame of mind of skepticism. I'm not sure. Not that's a bad thing. I think it's good. Okay, so week 2, wrapping it up here. Make sure that you complete all the assignments by midnight on Sunday, and we will start on our next set of topics on